That's right, because we were able to do his shiva, and we had all of those people, and just a couple of weeks after that, we would never have been able to do.
Dale said that was the last time there was anybody on the third floor.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so crazy. Our lives are so crazy. Hi, Naomi.
Hello.
And who's with us on the phone? Is that Faye?
No, that's Phyllis.
Oh, Phyllis. Hello, Phyllis.
Hello.
Okay. And I see that Debbie Block is still here, but I'm not sure that she's actually with us, or if she is just. There she is. Hello. Hello. Okay, great. All right. No, that's okay, Amanda. Is it okay if I'm without my mask?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm actually in the community room at 100 Center Street because we just did our memorial service,
It's great.
and I thought I would have a minute to move to a different room, but you know what? I was wrong. Oh my gosh! So
You don't mind if I clean?
not at all, not at all. Hello, Jeannie.
Hi.
All right, so we are on the second chapter of the book of Job. Let me pull up the. I'm going to put it on the screen for us, and we will just very briefly recall what happened in the first chapter. Hi, Kara, and then we will. I think I said hi to Kara too early. Hello again, Kara. And I will. So we will just recall what is happening in the book of in the first book, in the first chapter, and then we will move from there. So we won't go through the first chapter in great detail. If you are interested, you can certainly go back and look at the. You can certainly go back and look at the YouTube that we made of that conversation last time. Oops, sorry everybody. This is a little bit more complicated than I had hoped. Okay. There we go. We're getting there now. Okay. There we go. All right. And then this will go up, and then this will go down. Okay. So oopsie. There we go. So the basic story of the book of Job, right, is the basic structure is that we have sort of an initial frame story where Hasatan, right, the adversary, it's not Satan as we would generally think of Satan in a Christian or later Jewish context, right? It's really the adversary. Sort of, and actually, one of the ways that it's this figure is thought about in later Jewish thought is as sort of the prosecuting attorney, not so much as a separate independent person, but rather kind of an almost sort of an aspect of God who's focused on accusing people of various crimes and so on and so forth. So just to make sure that we understand that, right? And we have this sort of very odd and really very difficult to understand conversation between the adversary and God, right? Saying that, sort of agreeing that they're going to sort of ruin Job's life and see what he does, right? As Robert Alter says in his commentary to the book. Right? He says that this is really a challenging story in the context of ethical monotheism, and he says that in a sense, it's quite possible that this story was sort of set in a time before there was kind of an ethical monotheism. So that maybe we just kind of, because no one in the book ever kind of addresses the ethics of this, right? The idea that God would say to the adversary, "Go and do whatever you want to this guy, and see how he responds." So, at the very end of this first chapter, Job has lost everything except for his health. Right? He's still healthy, but he's lost all of his kids and he's lost all of his livestock. And so, what at the very end you'll see on the screen, and Phyllis, I'll read this. And then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down to the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither." Right? So naked I came from the earth, so to speak, right? Phyllis, I'm just going to mute you, and feel free to unmute yourself when you're ready to speak. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Right? And for all this, Job sinned not, nor ascribed aught unseemly to God. Right? So this phrase, Adonai Natan, Vadonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mivarach, this is a phrase that is used in the Jewish funeral liturgy, right? And sort of gives and is described in biblical scholarship as sort of patient Job, right? The Job that sort of accepts the reality that suffering like good stuff comes from God, right? And so we just bless God no matter what happens. Not obviously the attitude of everybody, not necessarily even the attitude of Job later on in the book of Job. All right, so let's turn to the second chapter, which is a little shorter, and then we'll get to the meat of the story, which is in chapter 3. Okay, and then I might actually read a little bit from another translation to give you a sense of that. Okay, so it again, right, there was a day that the sons of God, very interesting idea, right? B'nai ha-Elohim, right? So Alter makes a big deal of this, right? Someone has joined us. I'm not sure who it is, but someone has joined us. It's nice to see you. If you unmute yourself, you can tell us who you are. I don't recognize your phone number off the top of my head. But maybe it's Faye. I'm not even sure. Okay. So, and you can sort of get the sense of that. This. So, Alter suggests that this is written. It's a late work, but that the author uses archaic language and archaic ideas. Right. So, the idea of B'nai ha-Elohim, right, the sons of God. That this is an idea that's a little bit archaic, right? So he's trying to evoke an earlier period of Israelite storytelling, right? And they came to present themselves before Adonai, and the Satan, right here it says Satan, but again, don't get confused by the translation, right? But the adversary came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said, go ahead.
Is he a separate entity, or is he also one of the sons of God?
I'm sorry, Naomi. Your audio broke up sufficiently, so I wasn't able to hear you.
Is Satan one of the sons of God, or is he a separate entity who just happened along?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what it means is sort of like the angels, right? The retinue of God. probably.
So Satan is a fallen angel. Okay.
Yeah, and Hasatan, right? Hasatan, obviously in some Christian cosmology, right? Satan is a fallen angel, right? So this idea here that Hasatan, right, the adversary or the prosecuting attorney is among the angels of God, right? But there's no hint here, right, that Hasatan, right, the adversary, is going to rebel and try to go off on his own, right? He does pretty much whatever God tells him to do. Jeannie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm very confused about this Satan. And I told you I had a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness. And so, I'm very confused about Satan. Is it just a coincidence that his name is Satan? Is this who Satan is in Judaism? Is this the Satan of Christianity? I'm confused about this Satan. You say he's the prosecutor. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Oh, maybe what I'll do is instead of this translation, I'll bring a different one that will be a little bit less challenging in terms of having to see. Hold on one second.
And maybe he's not that important, but that, I sort of am influenced by the Christian ideas. So that's why, if we never heard of Satan, maybe we wouldn't be confused, or I wouldn't be confused.
I mean, you're absolutely right, right? The thing to remember all the time, right, is that, Judaism and Christianity and Islam are forever sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? They're always sort of influencing one another, right? And so, Judaism is influenced by Christianity, which is obviously influenced by Christianity, so on and so forth. So it can be very complicated, right, to figure out how to make sense of all of this. So this on the screen now is a more recent translation that we can use, and will hopefully be a little bit clearer. All right, hold on one second. I'm sorry that I'm only working with my little screen today and not a bigger screen. All right, so you see here that this translation, right, says the divine beings and the adversary. So yes, so Jeannie, you're absolutely right that this Hasatan, right? It's hard to say that it's a coincidence, right? If Hasatan had not shown up in Jewish scriptures, right, then the Christians might not have picked that name for Satan, if that makes sense. Right, but just because the Christians picked up this name for Satan doesn't mean that it meant the same thing in its original incarnation. If
So
that
it's
makes
not
sense.
necessarily the same guy, because in Christianity, in the Jehovah's Witnesses, he's so powerful and he's a constant threat everywhere.
Right.
So is this the same guy?
And it is the same guy, but it's not. But in Judaism, right, we don't hear about Satan,
Yeah.
right? And I think in part because I think in the Christian imagination, right, there is this sense in which Satan or the devil, right, has rebelled against God and has gone off on his own and established his own realm, right, that of hell. Right, and so Satan reigns over his own realm, and at least in the Miltonian Paradise Lost sort of paradigm, right, wants to conquer heaven as well, right, and this is why Satan goes after Eve. There is none of that, right, in the Jewish imagination, or at least it's very different. And Satan, Hasatan here is not disconnected from the other divine beings who are under God's control, right? So there's no point at which the being named Hasatan does anything against what God says, right? So he might argue with God, right, as he does in this case, right? But he doesn't ever go off on his own and do anything that God doesn't tell him to do, if that makes sense.
In the Kaddish, we say something like God has no competition, for example, sort of, isn't it? And so you're saying that our Satan, like in Christianity that I know of, Satan is a real threat. But
Right.
I thought in Judaism, he's not a threat. Nobody's a threat to God.
Right, he's not a threat unless God decides to give him leave to do troubling stuff, right? But I mean, on the other hand, right, it's very often imagined in the in the Talmud, right, that Hasatan will sort of be the katagor, right? I think that's the word for it, which is the prosecuting attorney, right? That he'll sort of say, God, this person has done something wrong. You should punish him according to strict justice, right? And then another aspect of God, will be the defense attorney, so to speak, and that person will say, no, you should exhibit mercy towards this person.
And is that
Right.
Satan too? That's the defense attorney?
It's a different name, but yeah. So in this case, right, we don't hear from a defense attorney, right? We only hear from Hasatan.
Thank you.
All right. So what does God say? What have you been doing? Right? I've been roaming all over the earth, right? This is what the divine beings do, right? They go out and they're looking, Hasatan is looking for people who are making trouble so he can make trouble for them. Right? And the Lord said to the adversary, now who is it, 9321?
Faye.
Oh, hi, I thought it was Faye. Hello, Faye. All right,
Hi.
Faye, I'm just going to mute you, okay? So that, hold on one second here.
Okay.
But if you want to say something, feel free to unmute yourself, okay?
Okay.
All right, great. So God says to the adversary, have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. Right? And God appears to be saying here, look, adversary, right? I said to you, go ahead and kill all his children and all of his flocks and see what he does. And even though you've done that, he still keeps his integrity. So you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason, right? He was not going to be moved by this, and yet you still convinced me to do this. And the adversary answered the Lord, I'm sorry, there's some weird noise in this room, which anyway, I apologize. Today is a very strange technical day. And the adversary answered the Lord, skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give up for his life. Right? So basically saying, we didn't try him hard enough. Right? We haven't done enough to make him curse you. Right? Because we took away his children, we took away his riches, right? But we didn't take away his health. And so if a man has his health, he won't complain about other things. But lay a hand on his bones and his flesh, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face. So the Lord said to the adversary, see, he's in your power, only spare his life. Right? So again, the ethics of this are very, very dubious. Right? But it's presented, obviously, as all coming from God. Not from the adversary. Right? God says this, not the adversary. And the adversary departed from the presence of the Lord and inflicted a severe inflammation on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He took a potsherd to scratch himself as he sat in ashes. And his wife said to him, still you keep your integrity, or you keep your innocence, or there's various ways of translating this, right? Blaspheme God and die. Right? Why do you persist, right, in remaining alive? Right? You may as well curse God and have God, wipe you out. Right? Why do you sit and suffer like this? But he said to her, you talk as any shameless woman might talk. Should we accept only good from God and not accept evil? And for all that, Job said nothing sinful. right? So very interesting, right? That there is Job here is still presented as patient Job. And that even though, that if we're going to take good from God or from life, right, we also have to accept the bad. Go ahead, Naomi.
This almost is sounding like what I think the Greek concept of Zeus and the other gods were, that those gods could occasionally just be downright nasty.
Yes.
It sounds very much like it comes from that part of the world.
Well, it is really interesting, isn't it, that there's an implicit there is an implicit here sort of justification almost that there will be good in the world and there will be bad in the world, right? And I'm not sure, right, that it's exactly pagan in the sense that that the God, or like the Greek gods, can sort of be just nasty for no reason, but because he is sort of monotheistic, but it is pre-Israelite, right? That's the other thing to remember. This is Job is not an Israelite, and so it is quite possible, right, that it's reflecting some sort of larger idea about God. But just I think here it's just simply that that life is going to hand you good stuff and life is going to hand you bad stuff, and you have to take them both, with a level of gratitude and grace. Hello, Rachel. Go ahead, Jeannie.
It reminds me a little bit of a concept in Buddhism. I forget how they translate it, but the idea is that you have to take whether what happens to you is good or bad. You have to react as if it's all the same.
Right. I mean, and there is a sort of the famous. We talked about this last Wednesday when Rachel was teaching about Purim, right? That the sort of classic Taoist story, right, where everything that's good, your response should be, well, we'll see if it's good, right? And everything that's bad, your response should be, well, we'll see if it's bad. Right? Because you never really know the sequel, right? Now, in this case, right, he's lost everything, and he's lost his health, and he's suffering to the point to which he's become disfigured, and we'll see that his friends don't even recognize him, right? So it's pretty bad, right? This is not just the regular ups and downs.
Something about Taoism, did you say?
Yeah, I just said about the famous Chinese story that gets repeated a lot about the acceptance of good and evil in the world, right? That when something good happens, the response of a wise person is, well, let's see how good it is, right? And if something bad happens, the response should be, let's see how bad it actually is.
Parable.
Yeah, the parable. Yeah.
If your son breaks his leg,
That's the
don't
parable.
think that's bad. That's good. That means the military won't take him in conscription.
Exactly. It's
That
right.
sort of thing.
Yeah, that's the story I had in mind. Exactly. All right. And when Job's 3 friends heard about all these calamities that had befallen him, each came from his home: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Nachmatite. They met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could not recognize him, and they broke into loud weeping. Each one tore his robe and threw dust into the air onto his head. Right? They couldn't even recognize him. This is how bad he looked. Right? And so they do, tearing their robe and throwing dust into the air onto their heads, suggests some sort of mourning rituals. Right? And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. It's kind of a proto-Shiva, right? And this is actually one of the places where we get, this is one of the sources for Shiva, right? That none spoke a word to him, for they saw how very great was his suffering, right? The idea being that when someone is in mourning, right, we don't initiate the conversation, right? We wait for that person to be ready to speak, and then when they talk to us, we can respond to them, right? And that's kind of the way that it works out here. Although we'll soon find that in the body of the story, as opposed to in the frame story, right, these three friends are not nearly as supportive as all that. All right, so any thoughts before we move on to Job's first poem? And if you would like to talk, please just unmute yourself and speak, because or raise your hand electronically, because I don't have. Yeah, go ahead.
If you look at the book as a whole, this emphasis really is on faith. He's consumed by faith. Nothing bad can happen to him. He still trusts God. And the story is then built up to see if, in fact, that lasts.
Right. Right. And it's very interesting, right? Because in the first two chapters, right, that faith does last. Right. And now in the third chapter, right, we'll see, well, maybe not so much. Right. And it's very interesting to sort of consider, like, what's the difference? What has changed? And how, and so one of the questions is always, why do we even have this? Why do we even have this this frame story, right? Which is, I think. Go ahead, Ann. Did someone want to say something? Okay. So, one of the questions is, why do we have this frame story, right? Which is going to present such a different view of the proceedings than the central part of the story, which we're going to get to now. So chapter 3 is Job's first poem, and Robert Alter talks about this poetry as sort of being the pinnacle of biblical poetry, right? That there's Job as a poet, has a richness of vocabulary, sort of a vividness of image, right? That's really unparalleled elsewhere in the Bible, and even in English. And so I thought what I would do is we'll read it. We can read it in the JPS, which is right here, and then I would read to you Robert Alter's translation, which is is also very good. All right, so after that, right, after acharei ken patach Iyov et pihu, right, he opened up his mouth, right, vaykalel et yomo, right, and he cursed his day. Right? So he doesn't curse God, right? Very interesting, but he curses his day, which is understood as cursing the day of his birth, which we'll see that that's actually what he does in his poems. So they're just extrapolating from what comes later. All right. So Job spoke up and said, "Perish the day," right? Or Alter has annulled the day on which I was born, and the night it was announced a male has been conceived. Right. So just to stop for a moment on this verse in terms of biblical poetry, right? Biblical poetry works by a process called parallelism, right? So here, right, we said yovad, or perish, or be lost, right? Or as I said in Alter, annul the day on which I was born, right? And then the poetry of parallelism means generally, right, that the second half of the verse will be an intensification, right, of the first half. So the intensification of this first verset, it's called, right, or half a verse, right, is Amar Harov Gaver, right? Or V'halayla Amar Hora Gavar, right? So and the night it was announced a male has been conceived, right? So he's intensifying it by going back 9 months, right, and saying it's not enough to annul the day I was born, right? What needs to be annulled is actually the night on which I was conceived, right? And so I not only do I wish I had never been born, I wish that I had never been conceived. And so this intensification is particularly intense.
Excuse me, a male has been conceived. Then they used to be able to know that.
No. I mean, that's obviously, obviously actually it's the translation actually here, right, makes it sound like, yeah, they knew somehow that it was a male, right? But actually a literal translation of this verse, right, and the night that said a man has been conceived, right? So in a sense, right, it's not claiming that anyone knew that it was a man except for the night itself, and so he's sort of he's it's not in the human realm that the night said this, right? It's in sort of a cosmic realm that the night said this, and that's what he wants to be annulled. So I think that points to not the idea that anyone knew that it happened, right? But that it was happening at all. That's what he wants to get rid of. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but I'm trying.
Well, it's the translation is really not very, it's not literal.
The translation in the JPS is not literal. Let me read you. I'm taking my interpretation straight from Alter. Annul the day that I was born and the night that said a man is conceived. Right. So I think, again, he's not talking about humans making any kind of announcement, right? He's talking about the night. Obviously, God or the universe at that point knew it was a man, or knew that Job would be a man, right? No one else did. May that day be darkness. May God above have no concern for it. May light not shine on it. May darkness and deep gloom reclaim it. May a pall lie over it. May what blackens the day terrify it. Right. So this is just this constant sort of pile driver of night imagery or darkness, right? Overcoming the light in the day. May obscurity carry off that night. May it not be counted among the days of the year. May it not appear in any of its months. May that night be desolate. May no sound of joy be heard in it. May those who cast spells upon the day damn it, those prepared to disable Leviathan. May its twilight stars remain dark. May it hope for light and have none. May it not see the glimmerings of the dawn, because it did not block my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth, expire as I came forth from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me or breasts for me to suck? For now I would be lying in repose, asleep and at rest, with the world's kings and counselors who rebuild ruins for themselves, or with nobles who possess gold and who fill their houses with silver. Or why was I not like a buried stillbirth, like babies who never saw the light? There the wicked cease from troubling. There rest those whose strength is spent. Prisoners are wholly at ease. They do not hear the taskmaster's voice. Small and great alike are there, and the slave is free of his master. Why does he give light to the sufferer and life to the bitter in spirit? To those who wait for death, but it does not come, who search for it more than for treasure, who rejoice to exultation and are glad to reach the grave. To the man who has lost his way, whom God has hedged about, my groaning serves as my bread, my roaring pours forth as water. For what I feared has overtaken me, what I dreaded has come upon me. I had no repose, no quiet, no rest, and trouble came. All right, so thoughts, ideas. Go ahead, David.
Well, I still don't know. What is the translation that you've been reading from?
This is the Jewish Publication Society translation. And
JPS, is that what?
yeah, JPS, yeah. That's what Safaria has on its website. And then but I thought once we if we have people can react to this translation, and then I would read or do you want me just to read the altar translation now? And
Well, he only mentions God a couple of times.
Yeah.
Indirectly.
yeah, what do you make of that?
I'm not sure.
Enjoying his life.
Go ahead, Naomi, and then Connie.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's an ambivalence. He's not quite saying, God, why have you done this to me? But he is implying that God, I'm not sure I can still see the quote, but to the man who has lost his way, whom God has hedged about. It's not quite blaming God.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's not letting him off completely.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, right? And I do think that there's a way in which this initial poem, right, is not as direct, right, in cursing God as you might think it would be, right? It's more generalized,
Yeah.
right? It's sort of in the sense that God has sort of not given us any particular way out, right? But it's really the day of my birth, right? It's really the fact that I was born at all. And I'm not necessarily going to blame God for that, but I'm not sure why I had to be alive, right? There's a kind of a death wish here, right? That, why do I have to wait for death, right? Why do I have to suffer this while I'm waiting for death, given all that I've lost?
Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead.
there's an argument somewhere in the Talmud where two of the masters, they're discussing, arguing, is it best that we were never born, or is it best that we should be born, meaning the human race? And I think the conclusion was that it's better that we never should have been born, but since we are born, we might as well be here, follow the halakha and bless God, while we're here. Of course, rabbis didn't go through such tribulations as Job is going through, but there is an argument in the Talmud, and it did come out that it's best we shouldn't have been born.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting because in various places in the Talmud, there are stories of rabbis who endorse sufferings, right? Really, really major sufferings, right? And they ask many of the same questions. And I think at some level, right, that those questions are not entirely answerable, right? And I do think that that's part of that's ultimately part of the story of Job, right? Is that ultimately there is no answer.
Are you sure that they endorse sufferings or they accept it?
I mean, the rabbis, have this whole sort of idea of, the Isarin shel Ahava, right? The sufferings based on love, that there's a certain reward that comes in the wake of suffering. right? And and maybe they got that from the frame story of Job, right? He goes through all these sufferings, he loses everything, he gets incredibly sick, he never curses God, and then he's rewarded. He gets new kids, he gets I don't know if he gets a new wife or his wife is still around. He gets new kids and new riches, right? And everything sort of goes back the way it was, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the implicit question there, does that, does all that replacement stuff make up for what he's lost? And I think that's another good
Is
question.
it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worthwhile?
Exactly.
Well, the Christians adopted that. I mean, they're big into suffering. They think suffering is good. You suffer like Jesus suffered. They
Yeah,
adapted suffering. They think that's good suffering. The Christians.
I mean, we have a few Christians on the call, so we can ask them if that's their experience of Christianity.
Yeah. What they preach. Heard it on the radio yesterday. Suffering.
Okay. Go ahead, David. Do you have I know Connie wants to say something, but David, since that came up, do you have a perspective on that you can share?
It depends on who you're listening to.
Yeah.
Like, some people would say that we have to suffer all the time, and some people would say, no, that's not what we have to do.
Yeah.
But that is an interesting point about it, that and in some societies in Mexico and even in New Mexico, women will walk on their knees for miles to get to a shrine, holding their rosaries, and get to the shrine and give their love to Jesus. So it's taken very much to extremes that way.
Yes.
For some people.
Right. No, I mean there is an emphasis on asceticism and self-flagellation in certain parts of various religious traditions. It's not really a part of mainstream Jewish tradition, but obviously it happens. So let me read. Connie, I wanted to come back to you.
I think he does question God here. He says, why does he give light to the sufferer and life to the bitter person, the one who's so depressed? That's God. Why did God do that? I also want to say that in passing, I think that this is incredible poetry.
Oh, it's just so beautiful.
My roaring pours forth as water. And all of these metaphors and similes are beautiful, extraordinary.
Yeah, extraordinary. So let me move on from that as a transition, Connie, to reading Alter's translation to you, because I think that his translation is even really captures much that the JPS does not.
Can I say one other thing quickly, Rabbi?
Sure, Faye, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
It's not a Jewish thing to suffer. It's all over the Proverbs and the Psalms. If you find favor from God, he'll give you your heart's desire. If you don't sin and watch your conduct, he'll make your enemies your allies. If you please God, you walk blamelessly, you'll walk in safety.
Yeah.
So it's conditional, but he is promising a good life. Not
Yes.
to suffer, but it's conditional. You got to
Right.
not sin.
Faye, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I said last week when we were talking about the first, or 2 weeks ago, and if you're interested, you can go back and look at it on YouTube. One of the things I said is that the remarkable thing about the Bible, right, is that it feels sometimes as though the people who put together the Bible were very intentional, right, about, on one hand, having all kinds of pious stuff, right, and to make sure that we knew, with the Proverbs, right, are full of all kinds of piety, the way we should behave and the rewards we'll get, and so on and so forth, right? But then there's all these other pieces of the Bible, and Job, the book of Job is one of them, where all of that seems to get thrown out the window, right? And there's almost kind of the exact opposite, right? So in the book of Job, right, we've got the most upright guy that could ever be imagined, right? And what happens to him? Right? He loses all of his kids, loses all of his livestock, and ends up so sick that he's deformed, and his friends don't even recognize him. Right.
Yeah.
So that, it's almost as though the people who put together the Bible were very intent upon making it impossible to say that the Bible says X, because you can always find the Bible saying, all kinds of other things as well. And so it's really interesting to try to weigh, all those sort of things against one another, and to figure out what to make of this very multivocal text. All right, so give me 1 second. I just need to close the door because there's a lot of noise in the hallway here. It's so funny. I'm so used to teaching from home where there's no noise except for occasionally the dogs will bark. But all right. So here's Alter's version. Annul the day that I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived. That day let it be darkness. Let God above not seek it out, nor brightness shine upon it. Let darkness, death's shadow foul it. Let a cloud mass rest upon it. Let day gloom dismay it. That night let murk overtake it. Let it not join the days of the years. Let it not enter the number of months. Oh, let that night be barren. Let it have no song of joy. Let the day cursors hex it, those ready to rouse Leviathan. Let its twilight stars go dark. Let it hope for day in vain. Let it not see the eyelids of dawn. For it did not shut the belly's doors to hide wretchedness from my eyes. Why did I not die from the womb, from the belly come out, breathe my last? Why did knees welcome me, and breasts that I should suck? For now I would lie and be still, would sleep and know repose, with kings and the counselors of earth who build ruins for themselves, or with princes, possessors of gold, who fill their houses with silver. Or like a buried stillborn I'd be, like babes who never saw light. There the wicked cease their troubling, and there the weary repose. Altogether the prisoners are tranquil, they hear not the taskmaster's voice. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free of his master. Why give light to the wretched, and life to the deeply embittered, who wait for death in vain, dig for it more than for treasure, who rejoice at the tomb, are glad when they find the grave. To a man whose way is hidden and God has hedged him about, for before my bread my moaning comes, and my roar pours out like water. For I feared a thing, it befell me. What I dreaded came upon me. I was not quiet, I was not still. I had no repose, and trouble came. So he's just so full of despair. Right? So full of despair. And I think one of the most powerful things about this is that so many of us can relate to this feeling, right? When there's been moments of tremendous sadness and darkness in our lives, that we can forget, right, that there was goodness along with the badness, right? That there, despite how terrible things are, that there were days that weren't so bad, right? And that, maybe there will be days in the future that are not so bad, right? But so I don't know. This just speaks very powerfully to me, and I think in this day and age of COVID, right? It speaks really strongly, right? Why is the world like this, right? Why is there so little that we can find that will be able to cheer us up? Go ahead, Connie.
Someone sent this to me and I really treasure it. It's from Tennyson. Though much is taken, much still abides.
Yeah. Right. And I think, Job here, right, and it's very interesting, right? And I feel like this book works on so many different levels, right? Because when someone is in this place, right, it's tempting, right, for us to try to cheer him up, right, to make him see that not everything is so bad, right? But that sometimes backfires, right? Sometimes we just can't, right? We have to let a person, go all the way down into the depths and let her come up on her own, right? Let her find the Tennyson quote, right? Rather than shoving it in her face, so to speak, right? And recognize that there are moments, right, where we feel like, oi, why am I even alive? Right? What's even the point of my life?
It can be like the clinically depressed person when someone comes up and says, "Snap out of it."
Yes, exactly, right. There's nothing worse, right? Like, I'm having a really terrible time, and you're just sitting there trying to cheer me up, right? And the Talmud is very clear about that. When someone is, faced with their loss, it's not your job to cheer them up, right? What's your job? Your job, what?
To listen.
To listen, right? Your job is to listen. Your job is to witness, right? Your job is to just to be there, right? I had a rabbi who was one of my teachers who used to say, "Don't just say something, sit there," right? And I think it's really, really important, really important advice, and it's also really important that we'll see in just a minute, right? That the friends don't follow that advice. Right? They don't follow that advice. So let's look, in the time we have left, let's look at the first half of chapter 4, which is Eliphaz, his first sort of response to Job. Right now, there's a textual problem with the book of Job. Right? There's several textual problems, but it seems that one of the textual problems is that the first half of chapter 4, what's called chapter 4, is actually Eliphaz. And then it seems that it sort of switches back to Job's voice, but it's never explicitly indicated that it's Job again. So different scholars have different ways of understanding it. But let's go with what we see Eliphaz saying. So, and we'll see what we think of Eliphaz's response. And Eliphaz the Temanite said in response, "If one ventures a word with you, will it be too much? But who can hold back his words? See, you have encouraged many. You have strengthened failing hands. You are such a mensch, Job. Your words have kept him who stumbled from falling. You have braced knees that gave way. But now that it overtakes you, it is too much. It reaches you, and you are unnerved. Is not your piety your confidence, your integrity your hope? Think now, what innocent man ever perished? Where have the upright been destroyed? As I have seen those who plow evil, and sow mischief reap them. They perish by a blast from God, are gone at the breath of his nostrils. The lion may roar, the cub may howl, but the teeth of the king of beasts are broken. The lion perishes for lack of prey, and its whelps are scattered. A word came to me in stealth. My ear caught a whisper of it. In thought-filled visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear and trembling came upon me, causing all my bones to quake with fright. Okay, so I'm going to stop now because we see that it's already shifted. Right? We see that already we seem to have a corruption in the text. So before we get too far, I just want to stop here in a moment on Job, right, and say that Eliphaz, right, what is Eliphaz's response? Yeah, okay, this is up through chapter. So JPS says through here, verse 11, is Eliphaz. So what's Eliphaz's? What is Eliphaz's? His point. What is he trying to say?
Righteous people are rewarded and evil people, only the evil suffer.
Right. So the implication is if you're suffering, Job, then it must be your own fault. Right? You must have done something wrong. Right? I mean, it's very, and what I find so interesting about, I mean, it's not a very interesting point, right? It's so clearly, anyone who came up to someone, if I were doing a funeral or whatever, and someone came up to the person and said, oh, how did he die? Oh, he died of X or Y. Oh, he must have really been an evil guy, if he died that way. Right? I mean, we don't, even ignoramuses don't, but we do get that, people do have a tendency to try to justify God that way. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Yeah, well, not so much, that's pretty extreme, but I think it's pretty common. When people are sick, some people will look for, well, how did he get that? What did he do? Because it gives them a feeling of you have control over your health. So I won't get sick. It won't happen to people who do ABC. We have control.
Right.
It relieves the anxiety about people just getting sick and bad things happening.
Yeah, exactly. No, and we see this, right? We see this with we saw this in the AIDS epidemic, right? Where people would blame people for getting AIDS. We see it today, and of course, it's very complicated in the age of COVID, right? Where we see some people who behave in ways that seem to not be very wise. But it's very hard to say to someone, you got sick because of your own behavior.
Yeah,
right?
And I carry it to another extreme. For example, September 11th, some famous evangelical whatever blamed New York for all the homosexuality.
Right.
So you always have control. Bad things don't have to happen to you if you just do so and so.
Right, exactly. Right, and it's so interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Connie. Yeah.
And in Israel,
Faye. Hello?
Hello, Connie first, Faye, and then you, Faye. Okay.
Okay.
Great.
and in Israel, when the Scuds were coming over in the Frumies, blamed those who didn't keep kosher.
Yes. Right. Exactly. Exactly. We can always find someone to blame, right? It's the gay people, right? It's the Jews who don't keep kosher, right? It's the the Jews who didn't leave Europe, before when they should have, and all that kind of right, exactly. Go ahead, Faye.
Yeah, but years ago, within Judaism, the Jews would always think that we did something wrong, that we sinned, and that's why we're punished and sick and unfortunate. And we always used to blame our sins on God's wrath. But then when the Holocaust came, they stopped doing that, the Jewish community, because they said they can't blame 6 million Jews for being bad and sinning. So they stopped blaming ourselves for our sins come the Holocaust. But before that, it was always we sinned, we did something wrong, we intermarried, and...
Yeah. No, Faye, you're bringing up something that's very, very important, right? And I do think that this is kind of what the Bible is getting at, right? We can kind of laugh at Eliphaz's sort of complete obtuseness, right? That he's so clueless, right? That he's blaming Job for his own misfortune when it's pretty clear to the reader that A, Job is not guilty, and B, even if he is, right, that's not how it's not the most helpful way to approach someone who is suffering. Yet you're absolutely right, that there is a strong tradition, right, of the Jews blaming themselves for their own misfortunes, right? And it didn't stop with the Holocaust, right? There are many Jews who are very happy to blame other Jews, for the Holocaust, right? And it's, and at the same time, we see, right, in the Bible, right in the book of Job, it's making it very clear, right, that bad things happen to good people all the time, right? One of the big heroes of the Bible, Job, is a good person, and bad things happen to him, not of his own. And we're sort of stuck trying to make sense of it, and it's very difficult to do.
And even worse than that is when good things happen to bad people.
Well, right, and that's the other side, right? And that's one of the places, right, where we pull out the parable of the broken leg, right? And the villager whose son is the best horseman, right? Oh, you're so lucky to have such a son. Oh, we'll see, and then he breaks his leg. Oh, it's such a terrible thing that he broke his leg. And then then the military comes to recruit soldiers, and the son can't go because he has a broken leg. Oh, it's such a good thing. We'll see. We never really know, right? In that sort of Taoist tradition, right? It's a little harder to it's a little, I remember there was a movie, I forget the name of the movie, but it had John Goodman as a Jewish father, and the son was trying to get a rise out of him, and he was saying, well, so Dad, what you're saying, you're talking about the Holocaust, right? But if it hadn't been for the Holocaust, we wouldn't have this house on Long Island, and live here, blah blah blah, and the father gets very angry, but doesn't really have anything coherent to say as a rejoinder. And so these problems happen. These problems happen all the time. All right. So next time we will pick up in the middle of this chapter 4 with verse 12, right, which is called the dream vision, right? So Job's first poem, is about how he wants to curse his life. The second thing that, according to biblical scholars, it was Job, right? Says it starts here on verse 12. A word came to me in stealth, right? My ear caught whisper of it, right? And it's sort of it's sort of a question. It raises some of the philosophical questions about the place of suffering in human life. So we'll get to that. We'll pick that up next time, and we will continue to explore. Please do. I really do hope you'll continue to join us for these conversations, because I think this is not only from the importance of trying to figure out something from the Bible about wisdom, but also just that this poetry is just astounding. And just from a purely literary perspective, it's remarkable. And so, anyway, does anyone want? I'm going to stop the share. Would anyone like to offer any last words?
Can I ask you a question?
You sure can. I don't know if I can answer it, but you can certainly ask.
No, it's personal. When we had the Purim on the Zoom, you mentioned that you couldn't find your crown and dress in your new apartment. Did you move?
I moved. I did. I moved.
You sold the house?
Nope. My wife and I separated, and I moved to Brighton. So.
Oh, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Who has the dogs?
The dogs are with me.
Okay, that's good. Look, I'm sorry that happened.
Thank you.
Oh, Rabbi,
Bye-bye,
I'm
Amanda.
sorry.
Thank you. Well, thank you for asking.
Yeah. All right. I didn't
Thank you for
know,
today.
you know?
Thank you for today, Rabbi.
You're welcome, Connie. Thank you,
Very-
everyone, for everything you offered and your questions and your insights. And I hope you'll join us next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Bye.
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.